What's up, Brainy Gamers? DC Green again, bringing you Game of Thrones, Episode 7. Today I'm getting back to my roots, and I'm going to be doing a game pick and ban strategy analysis, as well as covering the games. I've been reading the comments on the last video and taking everything to heart. There's going to be no sped up gameplay. I'm going to have commentary synced up with the actual footage, as well as provide with you guys a snapshot montage at the end of every game to give you a brief recap about what happened and why the teams that won. Today we're going to be looking at Team Dynamic versus TSM in the loser bracket semifinals, I believe, of the TSM Invitational. I haven't watched the games yet, so that I have no bias on them, and it should be a lot of fun to look at them. Before we get started, I'd just like to plug all my social media outlets. I am on Twitter and Facebook as ROGDCGreen, and I've also been streaming a lot lately on my Twitch TV channel, which is twitch.tv/Game of Thrones. So if you want to stay up to date with everything that is DC Green and Game of Thrones, be sure to follow and like me on Twitter and Facebook, as I'm going to probably start doing like a weekly $10 RP card giveaway where I'll just tweet out the number or something like that, and you won't be able to see it unless you're following me. So yeah, you should. And now let's get into the games. Just to be clear, going into Game 1, these games were played during the Jace patch, so all changes that are currently on live are present in this game. So that means Nautilus got nerfed, AoE Ultimates got nerfed, Karthus, Shen, Soraka, everything, the Gragas got buffed, things like that. So take that into account when analyzing these picks and bans with me. So the bans are a little strange for TSM, so I'm going to go ahead and take some time going over them. Ziggs got buffed this patch, his mana costs were reduced on his Q, also got buffed, and I don't know what's going on with Teemo, but something that you see a lot in high-level competitive play is bans against teams and not necessarily like bans against the metagame. Like in solo queue, you would see, you know, Shen, Nautilus, Alistar, Morgana, Shaco, Blitzcrank, things like that banned because one player having those heroes can snowball a solo queue game. But in competitive play, the teams ban against other players on those teams. It's better to fight against Nautilus than to give Reginald Karthus, for example. When we look at Ziggs, Xerath, Teemo, those are very strange bans, but I imagine that there are very capable players on Team Dynamic that can play those heroes. Going over to Team Dynamic's bans, they banned Karthus and Kennen, which is really smart because TSM likes to run a double AP AoE comp, usually revolving around Karthus, Kennen, Vlad, Morgana, and sometimes Swain. So by banning out some of those heroes, the more problematic ones, it reduces their chances of being able to run a successful double AP AoE comp. The last ban, which is Urgot, in competitive play right now, Purple Team is kind of forced into banning Urgot because this is something that you should also do in solo queue. When you're Blue Team, because you have first pick, you can be really, really lenient with your bans, because whatever the other team doesn't ban or forgets to ban, you get. So when you're Purple Team, you almost always have to ban out something that's really, really overpowered because there's no chance that the other team is going to pass it up. So in this case, they ban Urgot as their last ban because TSM will 90% of the time pick up Urgot because he's open. Now, I've taken the liberty to color code the picks, so anyone that doesn't understand how it works or gets lost when I'm analyzing can see how teams pick and then react to what has been picked. So, as you can see, TSM gets first pick and they take Nocturne. Now, Nocturne's a very aggressive jungler. He's a good first pick. It doesn't give the other team a lot of information about what you're going to do. So, solid pick on their part. Passing it back to Dynamic, they pick up Vladimir and Shen. Now, these are both really strong picks. Vladimir can go middle, but more than likely he goes top, and Shen will more than likely be in the jungle. So what I'm getting from this pick is saying that we're confident with your Nocturne pick. We'll get another jungler that has equally as good ganks up to level 6, and then at level 6 we can do a lot of really interesting and dynamic things because we have global presence, kind of like Nocturne does. So I think that's a really fair counter pick. I think Shen is a really good counter pick to Nocturne. Or it's not really a counter pick per se, it's a good counter mechanic because Nocturne has global ganking presence and so does Shen. so they can counter Nocturne's ganking by shielding whoever is being attacked. And I think that that's really smart. And then Vladimir is just one of those picks that he's really, really solid. There's not a lot of ways that pro players can counter him because their play is usually extremely solid. And it's also denying TSM one of those heroes that they will try and get the second time around. So I think this is a really strong pick for Dynamic. Now going over to TSM, they get the green picks now, and they picked Ashe and Twisted Fate. As you can see, they're going for a global composition. They have Ashe's Arrow for initiation coupled with Nocturne and Twisted Fate. That's 3 heroes that have very long distance ultimates. It provides a lot of initiation. It provides a lot of surprise ganking. This is going to secure them a lot of map control, and come late game is going to put them in the driver's seat for initiating engagements. Now coming back over to Dynamic, we see them pick up Nunu and Corki. This is a really good answer to Ashe, their Ashe pick, because Ashe is very, very weak bottom lane. So what they said was, we're just going to run a really aggressive bot lane. Both Nunu and Corki have a lot of burst potential with snowballs and phosphorus bombs, as well as just the raw damage potential that Corki can put out with Gatling gun. Ashe's ability to compete with that doesn't compare till she gets really farmed. Her volley doesn't burst. If things are in the way, it won't hit. She's really only going to have something to make plays with when she's level 6 and has her arrow. And even then, her arrow won't be able to save her from an engagement initiated by Corki and Nunu. So I think that's a really strong pick, because even if TSM picks a stronger support to counteract that, there's still not going to be a lot of offensive power from Ashe till late game. So I think this was a good pick by them, because they see that late game team compositions are going to be very, very difficult to win against TSM because of their good initiation and also possible counter initiations with Ashe. So they're looking for like a win lane, win game kind of strategy. Now going over to TSM, we see Malphite and Janna getting picked up. These are both solid pickups by TSM. I feel like Malphite is fine against Vladimir. They're both going to be able to farm very safely. I think that they could have tried to pick something a little bit more aggressive against Vladimir to keep him kind of suppressed through the middle of the game. But having an equally strong Malphite is a pretty good trade-off. And then they picked up Janna, which is probably the better support to run with Ashe against Corki and Nunu. Because if you run Soraka, you're just going to be way too weak. They give up the staying power of Soraka to go with a more counter-aggressive support. And I think that that will work in their favor. And I think this is a very smart pick by them. Now, going back to TD, you see they have the last pick, so they have the ability to swap roles now between interchangeable heroes and really turn anything that TSM picked on its head, and they do this very well by picking Olaf. It looked like Shen could have been going in the jungle, but now it's obvious that Olaf is. So we see that Shen is going to be going top against Malphite, Vladimir is going to be going middle against Twisted Fate, and Olaf is going to be in the jungle competing with Nocturne. So this is a really good move by Team Dynamic to keep their picks very versatile, because it allows them to do this, to say, hey, we can swap these guys in the lanes for stronger matchups, and this will carry us better into the middle and the late game. And I think that this is a good pick. Also, Olaf is Nintendo's favorite jungler, so this is just all around a very, very strong pick for their team. Now, I haven't watched any of these games, and if I had to make a guess based on team composition, who's going to win, I would say that Team Dynamic is a much, much better late game composition. Shen, Vladimir, Corki, Olaf are really strong in team fights and just in lane. But I think that ultimately they will be able to carry harder than TSM's team. TSM needs to capitalize in the early game. They need to make really good use of Nocturne ganks. They need to make good attempts on Dragon with Ashe's Arrow presence. And they also need to make use of combined ganks from Twisted Fate with Nocturne and the other lanes. Which is very possible, because I think that Twisted Fate will be able to push Vladimir out of lane often, and that'll give him the ability to roam. So as long as Vladimir takes the precaution to put wards on the side of middle lane so that his team can react to Twisted Fate trying to roam and gank, then I think they'll be able to make it in the late game and to win. So I'm saying right now that if TSM doesn't make a lot of stuff happen early game, which they're pretty good at doing. They have an aggressive jungler. They're probably going to go for a lot of invading and a lot of cross-the-map ganking with arrows and Twisted Fate porting in. Then they can snowball the game into their favor and beat Dynamic before they get into the late game. But if Dynamic plays all their lanes very solid, if they start a snowball starting bottom, or if they get a snowball rolling bottom lane, just killing Ashe over and over and making them near useless, if Vladimir gets out of control, if Shen just starts pushing top harder than Malphite can deal with, and if Olaf puts a lot of pressure on their jungler because he's one of the best dueling junglers that there is, then they can definitely carry it to late game and they'll win no contest. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. Okay, before I start analyzing the matches, I've taken the time to put the links for the match videos in the description, in case anybody out there wants to watch these matches before they hear me analyze them. Because obviously, if you watch through the whole thing, you'll find out who wins and who loses, and that might ruin the experience for you had you not seen the entire match. So take this time right now to go look for the link in the description and go watch the videos, and then you can come back and watch this part, and I'll do the same thing for game 2, give you guys a little bit of breathing room to pause the video and watch the match. If you don't care about that, then just keep watching through and I'll jump right into the analysis. Okay, so the beginning of the game was pretty slow, not a lot happened, there was some counter jungling and things like that, but not a lot of kills happened till about level 6, and TSM's global presence really started to take effect. So as you just saw, TSM was able to push out middle lane with Twisted Fate, and then the triple gank top with Twisted Fate porting in and Nocturne diving in, and then Malphite using his ultimate, and they get first blood on Shen. Now this is a good exchange for TSM, except that Reginald dies right there, so it ends up being a 1-for-1. Also, seeing the jungler top, Team Dynamic decides to get Dragon. So they make the best of a bad situation and actually come out kind of alright in this situation. Then these next 2 clips are just re-emphasis on TSM's ability to constantly gank top lane and terrorize them, which is basically what they start doing all game. Twisted Fate pushes out middle again, walks down river, Nocturne flies in, Twisted Fate teleports in, and there's another dead Shen. In this clip, we see pretty much the exact same thing. If anyone's wondering where the other kills came from, they're now on the scoreboard. It hasn't been a lot of aggressive ganking or anything like that. Team Dynamic actually got into a pretty big skirmish in bottom lane in the middle of the jungle, and that's where some of those kills came from. But nothing detrimental to set them back. In this clip again, we see Dynamic trying to be really aggressive in TSM's jungle, and they're doing this to try and make a play bottom lane to kill Ashe and Janna and take that tower, and also get Dragon, which they have the timer on and it's about to respawn. Unfortunately, Olaf gets caught out by Malphite here, who's pretty farmed because of all the ganks top, and they start putting the pressure onto Vladimir, who's forced to pool, and then gets hit with a really good Ashe arrow. Then Nocturne shows up and Twisted Fate shows up because they can basically be anywhere on the map at any time, and TSM picks up a Dragon here uncontested. Now, this is also another good example of how I said TSM is going to have to use Ashe arrows to aggressively take dragons. So that was a perfect example. This next clip again is TD being overly aggressive in TSM's jungle. And the thing is that they really don't have a lot of business being this aggressive early in the game. TSM has the ability to pretty much be anywhere on the map at any time. And Team Dynamic also has heroes that scale much better into the late game than they do into the early and mid game. So as you can see here, Vladimir gets picked off very easily by TSM, and they can't seem to get Twisted Fate or to get anyone for that matter. TSM has a lot of slows and crowd controls, and Dynamic is forced to just run. And this results in 3 more kills for TSM, putting them 4-for-1 in this entire exchange. Or 4-for-0 actually, because Team Dynamic actually doesn't manage to kill anybody. This is the first part of the game where Team Dynamic starts to throw. Not that they were significantly ahead at any other point in the game, but like I said in my analysis, they have a very strong late game composition, and if they give TSM these needlessly avoidable kills, then they're going to scale them better, and it's going to make their chances of late game domination that much harder. In this clip, we see a really good example of TSM using their global presence yet again. We're going to see Twisted Fate in middle lane kind of dancing around and taunting Vladimir, and he's just going to take his time and lock a gold card, and he's going to hit Vladimir with it. It's going to get followed up by an Ash Arrow. He's going to put a ton of damage down, and this is going to result in a kill. Now Vladimir does almost kill Twisted Fate, but he doesn't, which is the point, and this is going to give TSM middle tower. So really exemplifying how they use their global presence to their absolute advantage to get objectives and kills. Now TSM has been farming up and feeling really good about their advantage right now. They're ahead by 7 kills, so they start to push in onto the second bottom tower of TD. They also know that their blue buff is about to spawn, and they're going to try and make a steal for that. As we can see, blue's up, and Nocturne is in the process of stealing it. He successfully gets it, and TSM start poking because they want to stay aggressive. They know that they're in a position of power, and they want to try and poke Dynamic down and take this tower. Now, Twisted Fate gets taunted right there, and this turns into a giant fight. And Olaf just turns on his ultimate and follows up and kills Twisted Fate, even though he sacrifices himself. The rest of Dynamic is then able to chain all their ultimates together and just use their teamwork to kill Ashe and Malphite. Now, this is a really good start of a comeback for TD, but they get very greedy here and they decide to go for Baron when they could have taken some other smaller objectives. I think Baron is a really greedy and overzealous thing to try and get here, especially since Nocturne's alive, so they still have that looming threat of a smite steal, and their Olaf died, so they don't have smite themselves. So this was just a really, really risky play and not worth it. Also, they didn't factor in that TSM has such high global presence that they can just show up literally out of nowhere. As you saw, Twisted Fate just poured it in, Malphite just poured it in, and now this has become a very, very dangerous situation for Dynamic, and it's going to get very sloppy, especially with the fact that Olaf just came in from the side and he's completely split from his team. So they try and catch Malphite out, but Malphite sees that the rest of his team is there, and he goes in for initiation, gets a lot of damage on to Team Dynamic, who's also been weakened from the Baron, and they get split. This leads to Vladimir dying, and a perfect Ash Arrow hits Corki through the Valkyrie, and this is going to lead to his death as well as Nunu's. So as you can see right there, Corki gets picked off. Even if Janna hadn't killed him with the help of the golems right there, if you saw, Malphite was right there, and Malphite definitely would have picked up the kill. Then for some reason, Olaf decides to hang around, and I don't know how. I guess that ward drop right there was just perfect, and TSM is able to pick him up right here without any problems. So what turned into a 3-for-1 exchange, and could have been a couple global objectives for TD, turned into a reverse 4-for-1 exchange when they only killed Nocturne and then gave TSM Baron. And it was just really, really greedy. They could have easily taken the second bottom tower, which they were next to because that fight broke out by Dragon. They could have taken the second middle tower. They could have tried to invade TSM's buffs. They greedily went for Baron, especially with Nocturne still being alive and Olaf being dead. That was just a very foolish play by them, and as you can see, it really bites them in the ass, and it's the second moment of the game that they throw any chance that they have of winning. Now with Baron intact, TSM, they lay down some pretty good poke with volley and wild cards, and as you can see here, they're just going to go in and they're going to take out the tower very quickly. The fight's going to break out. TF uses his ultimate to give everybody vision. Malphite comes in and gets a double kill with his ultimate, ground slams, gets a triple kill. Shen escapes, but it doesn't matter. TSM just pushes down the inhibitor, and I believe Team Dynamic surrenders here, and we'll move on to game 2. So, I attribute TD's loss to just being overly aggressive in the early to mid game when their heroes don't support that kind of aggression, and then being too greedy after the fight that they got at their second bottom tower. Going for Baron was just a foolish goal, and they really should have tried to take smaller bites out of the game to regain control instead of going for Baron and ripping control from the hands of TSM. Because as you see, they were able to utilize their teleport and Twisted Fate to keep pressure on them while they did Baron, and it just blew up in their face. Okay, so getting into the second game, I just want to let everybody know that I read in the comments that people didn't want me to watch the games beforehand and then analyze the picks and bans because it might give me insider knowledge and bias as to like what team's going to win and things like that. So I want you to know that I'm doing this second game pick and ban analysis immediately after I did the first game so that I don't know who wins or loses. Because this is a 2-game series, which means whoever won game 1 is also going to win game 2, and I didn't want to find out. So I decided to jump right into these, and I'm going to go ahead and start analyzing. So right away with the bans, we see a Karthus ban, a Twisted Fate ban, and a Malphite ban from Dynamic. The Karthus ban, very solid. I agree with it. If they don't have anybody that they think can play Karthus just as well as Reginald, they might as well get rid of it. The Twisted Fate and the Malphite bans are both new bans and champions that were picked by TSM last game. It's either indicative that Dynamic lost and these champions were very problematic for them, or just that they won but they'd rather not face them again this game. Maybe they'd rather see some more variety. Also, it could just be a combination of like they won but there was a lot of pressure put on them by these certain champions, and that's something that they just want to get rid of this game. Going over to TSM, their ban of Zillion and Veigar, again, I'm assuming are just targeted bans at Team Dynamic because I don't understand why they banned them. And they had to ban Urgot because they're a purple team. As you can see, that rule is a rule. Like, I'm not kidding about that. That's kind of something that happens. If you go through, like, tournament games and you watch, I guarantee you 90% of the time that Urgot gets banned, he gets banned by the second team picking. Okay, so this game, Team Dynamic decides to rip a page right into TSM's book and first pick Nocturne, and that's good. And then TSM counterpicks the exact same way that Team Dynamic did last game, picking up Vladimir and Shen. So, as you can see, both teams putting a lot of emphasis on whatever jungler we get is going to determine how we kind of make our team. Now, going back to Team Dynamic, they pick up Taric and Corki, setting themselves up for a very, very, very aggressive bottom lane once again. Now, I don't really agree with the Taric pick. I don't think that you need to be aggressive with Corki in order to win your lane, and also you don't know what the enemy team is picking. They could pick a Graves for all you know, and that's going to make your aggression a little bit harder to execute. I don't like Taric because I don't think he translates well into team fights, which is where real winners of the game will start to shine through. So I think that that's kind of a weak pick. I would have went with something like Soraka, especially after seeing Vladimir, because I think that Soraka counters Vladimir's ultimate very, very well. And also, Vladimir is very indicative of a double AP composition, and Soraka is also very good against double AP compositions because of her ultimate. So, passing it back, TSM decides to pick up Janna and Ashe. They're running the exact same bottom lane that they ran last game. These aren't stupid picks by any means. They know exactly what they're going up against, so they're very confident. And also, this gives them the option of keeping their middle or top lane pick or jungler pick open based on what they decide to run. Because, again, they picked very interchangeable heroes. And so this is a very smart move by them to pick their support and their bottom lane, especially since they know exactly what the opposing team's support and bottom lane is. Going back to Dynamic, they pick up Akali and Ryze. Now, I think what they were trying to do was manipulate TSM's picks by saying, look, you can put Shen top and we'll send Akali there, or you can put Vlad top and we'll send Akali there. Both matchups which we're very, very confident in. And then on top of that, we're also going to pick Ryze. So if you decide to pick a different top lane, you're going to have to send Vladimir against Ryze, and that's also a lane that we're very, very, very comfortable with. So I think that these are both very good picks. The Akali lane is much more susceptible to being thwarted, since their last pick is a very interchangeable role, seeing that they could actually just stick Shen in the jungle. This is risky, but it's a big risk, big reward play by Dynamic, because TSM's team also lacks a lot of crowd control necessary to shut down Akali. Going back to TSM, they pick up Jax and decide to send Jax top against Akali, which is actually a very, very favorable matchup for Jax. It adds another form of CC onto the team, as well as just a very good carry. Both lanes are going to be very, very fragile if the other starts to snowball. If Akali gets any kind of leg up on Jax, she'll completely take over him. If Jax gets any kind of leg up on Akali, he'll completely take over her. So top is going to be a very, very contested area. I think in this kind of a situation, if the junglers are going to camp the lanes, that the Nocturne pick is a lot better because it does more damage than Shen. So there is a good potential for Akali getting kills based on with help from Nocturne's damage. But it'll all depend. Also, if Jax buys early detection wards or Shen buys an early oracles, will also determine how that lane is swayed. So looking at the big picture, looking at both teams, I definitely think that TSM has a stronger late game team. Just like an all-around team. Jax is an incredibly good carry. Ashe has very good initiation. Shen is going to be able to split push, which is something that Dynamic isn't going to be able to ignore. Vladimir is just incredibly strong, boosts all the damage of his team. He's unkillable with his pool. It's going to be very, very good. Dynamic has a lot of very powerful single carry kind of heroes. Like they have no synergy together as TSM's team might have, but individually they're very, very scary damage outputting champions. So it's one of those things where they're going to be able to take off early game if the game progresses in that way. But if it goes to late game, I would completely just give it to TSM. So we'll see what happens. Okay, so here we are getting into game 2. Like I did with game 1, this is just going to be a brief pause period if you want to put this video on hold and go watch the actual match. The link to it is in the description, as was the last one. So go ahead and do that, and if not, we'll get right ahead into the video. Okay, so these first clips are just to show that the pace of game 2 was vastly different from the pace of game 1. As you can see in all the lanes, there's a lot of early aggression, flashes being used, summoner spells going on cooldown. Team Dynamic really trying to put their picks to good use. We can see right here that the Vladimir Ryze matchup is going to be a point of conflict all game, and that they're going to be extremely, extremely aggressive towards each other. Ryze getting first blood, and then Shen getting the assist for Vladimir. In this clip again, we see Nintendo X being very aggressive on Nocturne, coming in the middle again, setting another gank for Ryze on Vladimir. So really trying to keep Ryze in the driver's seat of middle lane. Now we're going to see Nocturne keep up that aggression and try and gank Jax top, and this is going to turn into a really aggressive tower dive for Akali, which, even though she avoids Shen here, she does end up dying because Vladimir comes to help get the kill. Ultimately, Shen picks up the kill, though. Here we see Nocturne being aggressive bottom lane, and he goes to gank, and then Shen protects Ashe with his shield, and that's kind of how I said in the very beginning of the Game 1 analysis, that Shen kind of counteracts Nocturne's gank. And here, TSM is putting a lot of pressure onto Corki and Taric, and they actually end up killing Taric, and then Ryze and Vladimir kill each other again in middle lane. In this clip, we see more aggression down bottom lane, and you're going to see Nocturne come in here to try and secure this kill. He is unable to kill Ashe right there, but he decides to go for Janna, and he fears her so that Taric can come in and get the stun, and this is going to let Corki pick up the kill. He then activates his ultimate and tries to dive onto Ashe and get the kill on her, but has to flash out the tower before he can finish her off. Here we see Ryze pushing down middle. Now the rest of Team Dynamic is going to come and help him push this so that they can continue their early game aggression, because that's where their team is going to strive the most. So after taking that tower down, they make an aggressive push onto the second tower. Akali goes to the side and she places a ward, expecting Jax to come down from top. This is really smart, and it pays off because here he comes, and what this allows them to do is she jumps on him immediately, and Team Dynamic is able to put so much damage onto him that now TSM can't get a good coordinated fight because their damage dealers are too low and too susceptible to being picked off in the beginning of the fight, which could lead them to them getting aced. So they decide to compromise and just give up the tower, and Team Dynamic is able to walk away. Here we see Dynamic keeping up their early aggression and invading the enemy red buff because they have so much map control due to the two towers being down in the middle. They also find Jax going to either pick up red or go farm top, and they pick him off as well. They now decide to use this to their advantage to take the second top tower. So this goes to show what getting 2 towers in the middle lane can really do for your map advantage. It limits the enemy's vision so much that it really gives you free domain to roam around, and Team Dynamic is using that to their advantage to get this tower. Here we see them showcasing the exact same strategy. Now that 2 towers are down in top, they're able to abuse that as far as their map advantage goes and pick off Jax again, and Shen, who comes in to try and save him with his ultimate. They then chase off Ashe but are unable to kill her, and then they retreat. Knowing that TSM has 2 members down, one of them being their jungler, TD decides to make a very aggressive push for Baron, which is exactly what they need to do. This is a much better decision than the Baron decision that they made in their previous game, because 1, the enemy jungler is down, and 2, it's not a desperate attempt. It's a very warranted attempt because they're so ahead. And this is going to help them keep up their mid-game prowess, which is where they need to capitalize. They need to win within the next 10 minutes of the game before giving TSM a chance to get the late game. TD put their newfound Baron to use and set their sights on the last outer tower of TSM, which is in bottom lane. They take it out completely uncontested and begin the push towards their base. Now they have pretty good poke and minion clear, so Corki is able to slowly peg down the tower with the help of Ryze. But because TSM is putting up a decent amount of resistance, Akali decides to head middle and kill all ongoing creep waves, so that middle lane will also begin to push. Here we see TD again going in, getting good shots on the tower, and backing off. And Akali going back to middle to clear the wave. While they're waiting, TD decides to take TSM's blue, just getting more advantage where they can. They then become kind of divided and start split pushing with 2 champions instead of 1, and Akali gets caught out here by an Ashe arrow, which is one of the threats that TD needed to be aware of. Now this is going to stunt their push from here on out, and they're going to have to retreat, which is unfortunate, but they're just going to have to consider that the next time they go for a surmountable push on TSM. Baron comes up again, and TD decides to go for it, knowing that they have TSM pretty secured in their base due to all the lane pressure. So they begin taking Baron down rather quickly, and Shen and Janna spot them with a ward. And then it looks like Jax gets caught out of position, and TD jump on him really quick. Now, a team fight breaks out, and Shen gets an incredible AoE taunt on every single member of TD, but they are still able to manage to come out on top, pick up Shen, pick up Jax, kill Ashe, and chase the rest of TSM away. Now, instead of going back to finish Baron, they just turn their sights on mid lane. Well, actually, Nocturne decides to kill Janna, which might as well. And then the rest of his team focus on the middle tower and inhibitor, but TSM just surrenders and gives them the game. So in this game, Team Dynamic played near perfectly. They were able to overcome a lot of the early aggression and get kills on the people that mattered, namely Ryze becoming much stronger than Vladimir, which allowed them to push middle aggressively. Good ward placement let them see Jax coming, which allowed them to initiate preemptively before TSM could, dissolving any chance of a structured team fight. Through exploitation of their newly gained map awareness, they were able to steal buffs as well as kill Jax and kill more towers to gain more map awareness to keep killing Jax. This eventually led to their early Baron, which allowed them to continue to snowball their lead, and eventually baiting the second Baron, again catching out Jax, allowed them to win the last team fight that they needed to secure the victory. Okay, so there's both games. Unfortunately, this was actually a best of 3, like it was a 3-game series, but I could only find the 2 games that were on TSM's website, as this was played in the TSM Invitational. So I don't know who won the 3rd game, but I thought it was a pleasant surprise to see that Dynamic won the 2nd game, because after TSM won the 1st game, I was like, okay, well, they won the 2nd game because there's only 2 of them. So that was cool. And it gives us a lot to think about, and also shows how Dynamic was able to adapt their bans to better suit themselves in the second game against TSM. Some things that I wanted to touch on that I missed in the analysis are the Taric pick in Game 2 was much better for Dynamic, because something that I noticed in Game 1 was that Ashe was able to kite Nunu before he could land a snowball on her. So they were never able to be as aggressive as they wanted to, because Ashe just wouldn't take damage, and then Janna would just shield her, and they would harass Corki and Nunu back to the point where they couldn't be aggressive anymore. So I like the Taric pick much better in the second game, because if Taric ever got a window of opportunity to land a stun, it was like, boom, you're taking a shatter, you're taking a phosphorus bomb, you're going to get a lot of damage put on you. And that was very, very relevant in the second game, as their bottom lane was able to be much more aggressive than in the first game. Something else that I didn't take into account in the first game was that Dyrus on Malphite took Teleport to add to the global composition that TSM was going for, which allowed them to just have that total map presence that they used to secure their first victory. This was something that I overlooked. It didn't play an enormous part in the early game, but it made a difference when Team Dynamic went for Baron and Malphite was able to teleport to the ward. So in the spirit of both these games being relatively thrown, we should kind of go over what happened in each game. Now, as I said, in Game 1, I thought that Team Dynamic had a much, much stronger late-game composition than TSM. TSM was going to need to properly execute early-game aggression to keep Team Dynamic from getting to that late game. They somewhat succeeded by ganking top lane a lot, although I don't think that this was greatly effective, but Team Dynamic actually threw their own advantage by being overly aggressive in early and mid-game. Even on the verge of a comeback, they threw again by going for Baron instead of safely trying to secure easier global objectives. In Game 2, however, they came back perfectly and played a very, very solid early game, snowballing the correct lane being middle so that Ryze could have his advantage over Vladimir. And they used this to gain 2 early towers, which gave them complete map control over TSM's jungle, which they then used to shut down the top lane and eventually pull an early Baron and snowball their victory from there. I would attribute TSM's loss mainly to Jax coming down into the middle lane from that side angle. He couldn't have accounted for them having a ward there, but still, his idea of flanking is not a very good idea because Jax isn't overly tanky in the early and middle game. So him being the initiator for his team was a really big mistake. And really what they should have had was Shen in the front, getting ready to initiate, if they were indeed going to defend. So that kind of screwed up their whole team dynamic, no pun intended, as far as coordinating an organized team fight, which was where their strength actually lied, because as I mentioned, Team Dynamics heroes were kind of strong in and amongst themselves, and TSM had more of a synergy. And so because they weren't able to gel together as 5 and fight, they couldn't do anything, and then the game slowly spiraled out of control. Okay, so that's going to be it for Game 7. I hope you enjoyed my analysis. I think that the 2 games that we watched were both very good, and they were both very different. And I think it was cool to see each team win a game instead of it actually being a, just a 2-0 victory like I originally thought. Like I said, I did the pick and ban analysis before I watched the games so that I wouldn't have any bias, and then it ended up being a 1-1 series with the third game just I can't find it, so I couldn't analyze it. So I hope you enjoyed this. I tried to make this episode, again, more about analysis and strategy rather than about solo queue or anything else random like that, because this is what this show was originally based upon. So look forward to the next episode being similar to this. Hopefully there will be some good tournament games played in the next couple weeks that I can analyze for you and put into perspective. If you want to catch more of me or anything else DC Green / Game of Thrones related, make sure you tune into my stream. I've been streaming a lot lately. It's Twitch TV / Game of Thrones. You can also find me on Facebook and Twitter as ROGDC Green. I don't have any announcements or prizes or anything like that to give away this week, but I will pull some stuff out of my bag for the next show. So be sure to tune in. Remember to subscribe to the Reign of Gaming YouTube channel so you can always see when the next Game of Thrones video, as well as frequently visiting reignofgaming.net, because I post the videos there and there's also a lot of great content. So thank you guys for watching, and please tune in next time.